Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. First, some background. I work for a mid-sized shipping and logistics company that handles international freight. Not the most exciting job in the world, but it pays well, and I am good at what I do. My official title is Senior Logistics Coordinator, but really I am more like a compliance specialist. I handle all the paperwork and digital authorizations for our international shipments, especially the high-value cargo that requires special customs clearances. Now here's the thing that becomes important later. About 2 years ago, our company started working with this new government portal system for customs declarations. It is called the Automated Commercial System Enhanced Portal, or ACSEP for short. Sounds boring, right? Well, it turns out this system is a massive pain to get authorized for. You need background checks, training certifications, and something called authorized signatory status. The whole process takes about 6 months and costs the company around $15,000 per person. When they were setting this up, my boss at the time asked who wanted to go through the certification process. Most of my coworkers took one look at the paperwork and said no thanks. I was the only one who volunteered because honestly I figured it would look good on my resume and maybe get me a raise, which it did eventually. So I became the only person in our company with ACSEP authorized signatory status. This means I am literally the only employee who can digitally sign off on certain types of international shipments. Without my signature, these shipments just sit wherever they are. Could be at the port, could be at the border, does not matter. They do not move until I sign the electronic customs forms. At the time, this seemed like a nice little job security perk. I had no idea it would become my secret weapon. Fast forward to about 4 months ago, we got a new middle manager named Dave. Dave came from some big corporate consulting firm and was all about efficiency metrics and cutting costs. He had this whole presentation about eliminating waste and maximizing productivity. Real corporate buzzword bingo stuff. Dave decided that our department was too relaxed and needed more structure. He started tracking our break times, monitoring our computer usage, and generally making everyone miserable. But the worst part was how he treated people's time off requests. Before Dave showed up, our old manager was pretty understanding about family emergencies and personal stuff. If you needed a day off for something important, you usually got it without too much hassle. Dave changed all that. He started denying time off requests left and right, saying we needed to plan better and that the business could not function if people kept taking unscheduled days off. I should probably mention that Dave also had this thing about the employee handbook. When he started, he spent weeks going through all our policies and procedures, supposedly to streamline things. But what he really did was enforce every single outdated rule that previous managers had been ignoring, including this one policy about digital security clearances that nobody had ever actually used before. The policy basically says that if an employee is terminated for cause, all their digital access gets wiped immediately as a security measure. And here's the kicker. Once your access is revoked, there is a mandatory 30-day cooling off period before it can be restored, and it requires board approval to reactivate. Dave insisted we keep this policy when he was updating the handbook, even though our IT department said it was unnecessarily restrictive. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about my grandfather. My grandfather was probably the most important person in my life. My parents divorced when I was 8, and both of them were too caught up in their own drama to pay much attention to me. So I ended up spending most of my childhood at my grandfather's house. He taught me how to fish, helped me with homework, took me to baseball games. He was basically more of a father to me than my actual father ever was. When I was in college, my grandfather was diagnosed with lung cancer. He fought it for years, going through surgery and chemotherapy and all that awful stuff, but somehow he kept his sense of humor through the whole thing. Even when he was weak from treatments, he would still call me every Sunday to check in and make sure I was doing okay. About 6 months ago, the doctors told us the cancer had spread and there was not much more they could do. My grandfather decided he did not want any more treatments. He just wanted to spend his remaining time at home with family. So we set up hospice care and took turns staying with him. 3 months ago, on a Thursday evening, I got the call from my aunt. My grandfather had passed away peacefully in his sleep. I was not even surprised because we had been expecting it for weeks, but it still hit me like a truck. This man who had been such a huge part of my life was just gone. I spent Thursday night with my family making funeral arrangements and calling relatives. The funeral was scheduled for that Monday, which was 3 days later. On Friday morning, I sent an email to Dave requesting 3 days of bereavement leave to attend the funeral and handle family stuff. Our company policy clearly states that employees are entitled to up to 5 days of paid bereavement leave for the death of an immediate family member. I only asked for 3 days, and I included all the proper documentation like the death certificate and funeral home information. Dave's response came back about 2 hours later. I still have the email saved because I could not believe what I was reading. He wrote that unfortunately we were in peak shipping season and the department could not afford to have anyone out for non-essential reasons. He said that while he sympathized with my loss, grief was not a business emergency and I needed to prioritize my professional responsibilities. He ended by saying that if I was not at my desk on Monday morning, he would consider it a voluntary resignation. I read that email probably 10 times trying to make sure I was understanding it correctly. He was basically telling me I could not go to my grandfather's funeral. The man who raised me was being buried, and my boss was saying that shipping some packages was more important. I was furious, but I also knew that arguing with Dave was pointless. He had already made up his mind, and he was the type of person who would double down rather than admit he was wrong. So instead of firing off an angry response, I took a few hours to cool down and think about my options. That is when I remembered the digital security policy that Dave had been so insistent about keeping in the handbook, and I started to get an idea. I wrote back a very simple email. I said I understood his position and that I would follow company policy regarding my absence. That was it. No arguing, no pleading, no drama, just a polite acknowledgement. Dave probably thought he had won. He had no idea what company policy I was actually planning to follow. That weekend, I flew out of state for the funeral. It was beautiful and heartbreaking, and exactly what my grandfather would have wanted. My whole extended family was there, and we spent hours sharing stories and memories. It was the kind of goodbye my grandfather deserved. On Sunday night, I got a text from my coworker asking if I was really not coming in the next day. I told her I was attending my grandfather's funeral and would be back when I could. She said Dave had been asking about me and seemed pretty agitated about something. Monday morning, I was still out of state helping my aunt clean out my grandfather's house when my phone started ringing. It was Dave, and he sounded absolutely livid. He started yelling at me before I could even say hello, asking where the hell I was and why I was not at my desk. I calmly explained that I was attending my grandfather's funeral, just like I had told him in my email. Dave went completely ballistic. He started screaming about how I was fired, that I had abandoned my responsibilities, and that he was processing my termination immediately. He said my access to company systems would be revoked within the hour, and I should not bother coming back. I stayed calm during the whole conversation. I told him I understood and that I would follow company policy regarding my termination. Again, Dave had no idea what policy I was referring to. About an hour later, I got an automated email notification that my access to all company systems had been revoked. This included my ACSEP credentials, which were tied to my employee account. According to the digital security policy that Dave had insisted on keeping, my authorized signatory status was immediately suspended and could not be restored for 30 days without board approval. I spent the rest of Monday helping my family and not thinking too much about work. I figured I would start looking for a new job when I got home. I was angry about being fired, but honestly, part of me was relieved to be done with Dave and his toxic management style. Tuesday morning, I was having coffee with my aunt when my personal phone rang. It was an unknown number with my company's area code. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. It was our CEO. I had never spoken to him directly before, but I recognized his voice from company meetings. He sounded stressed. He said there was an emergency with one of our biggest shipments and they needed my help. Apparently, a container worth about $2 million was stuck at the port because it needed an ACSEP authorization signature. Nobody else in the company had the credentials to sign off on it. I explained that I had been terminated yesterday and no longer worked for the company. The CEO said he knew about that, and they were working on getting me reinstated immediately. That is when I dropped the bomb. I told him that according to company policy, employees terminated for cause could not be reinstated for 30 days, and it required board approval. The CEO went quiet for a long moment. He asked if I was sure about that policy. I read him the exact wording from the employee handbook. He said he would call me back. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was the CEO and our head of legal on a conference call. They wanted to know if I would be willing to help them as an independent contractor. I said I might be interested, but my consulting rate would be significantly higher than my previous salary. When they asked how much, I told them my rate was $500 per hour with a 40-hour minimum contract. That worked out to $20,000, which was about what I used to make in 3 months. There was another long pause. Then the head of legal asked if that was negotiable. I said it was not, especially since I would need payment up front before starting any work. They agreed. By Wednesday afternoon, I had a signed consulting contract and a wire transfer for $20,000 in my bank account. The actual work took me about 4 hours. I logged into the ACSEP portal from my laptop, reviewed the shipment documentation, and signed the electronic customs forms. The whole thing could have been done from a beach in Hawaii if I had wanted. But here's where it gets really interesting. While I was reviewing the shipment documents, I noticed something odd. This particular container had been sitting at the port for 3 weeks, which meant the delay was not just because of my termination. Someone had been ignoring it for weeks before Dave fired me. I did a little digging and found out that Dave had been reassigning some of my routine tasks to other people without telling me, apparently as part of his efficiency initiative. But since those people did not have ACSEP credentials, they could not actually complete the work. They had just been sitting on it, probably afraid to tell Dave they could not do what he had asked. So not only had Dave caused a crisis by firing me, but he had been setting up the company for failure for weeks by giving people responsibilities they were not qualified to handle. I documented all of this in a detailed report and included it with my consulting invoice. I figured the company should know exactly how this situation had developed. On Thursday, I got another call from the CEO. He wanted to know if I would be interested in coming back to work permanently. I told him I was flattered, but according to the company policy, I was not eligible for rehire for 30 days. He asked if I would consider staying on as a consultant until then. I said I would be happy to help, but my rate would remain the same. He agreed. Over the next month, I worked from home as a consultant, handling all the ACSEP authorizations and training 2 other employees to get their own credentials. It was honestly the best month I had ever had at that job. I was making 4 times my previous salary, working from my pajamas, and I did not have to deal with Dave's micromanagement. Speaking of Dave, things did not go well for him after this whole mess became public knowledge within the company. The board of directors was not happy when they found out that his decision to fire me had cost the company over $250,000 in port fees, penalty charges, and consulting costs. They were even less happy when they read my report documenting how Dave had been mismanaging the department and setting up situations where critical work could not be completed. Dave was fired about 2 weeks after my consulting contract started. The official reason was gross mismanagement of company assets, but everyone knew it was really because he had caused a massive, expensive crisis just to prove a point about employee discipline. The cherry on top was that his replacement was our old manager, who had been moved to a different department when Dave arrived. One of her first acts was to revise the digital security policy to be less punitive and more practical. When my 30-day period was up, I was offered my old job back with a significant raise and a promotion to senior compliance manager. I also got a formal apology from the CEO for how I had been treated. But honestly, the best part of this whole experience was not the money or the vindication. It was that I got to attend my grandfather's funeral without any regrets. I was able to be there for my family when they needed me, and I got to say goodbye to the man who meant everything to me. The consulting money meant I could take 2 weeks off to help my aunt settle my grandfather's estate and just spend time processing my grief. I even used some of it to take my family on a vacation to a lake where my grandfather used to take me fishing when I was a kid. It felt like the right way to honor his memory. As for Dave, I heard through the grapevine that he ended up getting a job at some other company where he probably continues to make people miserable, but that is not my problem anymore. I did send him a thank you card about a month after he was fired. It was a simple card that said thank you for the paid vacation, with a picture of me fishing on the lake where my grandfather taught me to cast a line. I probably should not have done that, but it felt pretty good. Looking back on the whole situation, I think there are a few lessons here. First, always read your employee handbook carefully, especially the parts that seem outdated or overly complicated. You never know when those policies might become relevant. Second, if someone in management is being unreasonable about something as basic as bereavement leave, that tells you everything you need to know about their character and priorities. And third, sometimes the best revenge is not getting angry or trying to argue with unreasonable people. Sometimes the best revenge is just following their rules exactly as written and letting them deal with the consequences. Dave thought he was teaching me a lesson about professional priorities. Instead, he taught me that my skills were worth a lot more than I had been charging for them. He thought he was cutting dead weight from his department. Instead, he cut the only cable that was holding everything together. The really ironic part is that if Dave had just approved my original request for 3 days of bereavement leave, none of this would have happened. The company would have saved $250,000, Dave would still have his job, and I would still be working for my old salary. But then again, I would not have this story to tell, and I definitely would not have learned how much my expertise was really worth in the marketplace. I am still working for the same company, but now I have a lot more respect from management and a much better understanding of my own value. I also made sure to get my new contract terms in writing, including specific language about bereavement leave and family emergencies. My grandfather would have gotten a kick out of this whole story. He always taught me to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. He also had a pretty good sense of humor about people who thought they were more important than they actually were. I think he would have been proud that I did not back down when Dave tried to bully me. And I think he would have laughed pretty hard about the thank you card. The situation also made me realize how much I had been undervaluing my own skills and expertise. When you are the only person who can do something critical for a business, you have a lot more leverage than you might think. The key is knowing when and how to use that leverage appropriately. I am not saying everyone should try to hold their company hostage or anything like that. But I do think it is important to understand your own worth and not let managers take advantage of you just because they can. In my case, Dave's complete lack of empathy during a family crisis showed me exactly what kind of person he was and what kind of workplace culture he was trying to create. At that point, I had no obligation to protect him from the consequences of his own decisions. The fact that those consequences were so severe was really his own fault. If he had not insisted on keeping that outdated security policy, the IT department could have restored my access immediately. If he had not been micromanaging and reassigning tasks people could not complete, the company would not have been in such a vulnerable position. And if he had just shown a basic level of human decency about my grandfather's funeral, none of it would have happened at all. But Dave was so focused on proving his authority and showing everyone who was boss that he completely lost sight of the bigger picture. He was so concerned with appearing tough and uncompromising that he made decisions that ultimately cost his company huge amounts of money and cost him his own job. I sometimes wonder if he ever made the connection between his decision to deny my bereavement leave and the series of events that led to his termination. Probably not. People like Dave tend to blame everyone except themselves when things go wrong. The other thing that struck me about this whole experience was how quickly everything escalated once the crisis started. Within 24 hours, I went from being a fired employee to being desperately needed by the CEO. The company went from having complete control over the situation to being completely at my mercy. That is the thing about critical business processes. When they work smoothly, nobody really thinks about them. But when they break down, they can bring entire operations to a halt very quickly. In our case, Dave had never bothered to understand what I actually did or why my role was important. He just saw me as another employee who needed to be managed more strictly. He had no idea that firing me would create a massive operational crisis. I think this is pretty common in middle management. People get promoted to management positions without really understanding the technical details of their departments. They focus on metrics and procedures without understanding the actual work being done. Dave was so focused on enforcing policies and maximizing productivity that he never bothered to learn about ACSEP credentials or digital security protocols. If he had understood these systems, he never would have fired me without having a backup plan in place. But then again, if Dave had understood these systems, he probably would not have been the kind of manager who would fire someone for attending their grandfather's funeral in the first place. The whole experience taught me a lot about workplace dynamics and power structures. On paper, Dave had all the authority. He was the manager. I was just an employee. He could hire and fire people, approve or deny time off requests, and generally control everyone's work environment. But in reality, power in organizations is a lot more complicated than that. Sometimes the person with the most authority on paper is not actually the person with the most leverage in a given situation. In my case, my leverage came from having specialized knowledge and credentials that nobody else in the company had. Dave did not recognize this leverage because he did not understand the technical aspects of what I did. When he fired me, he thought he was exercising his managerial authority to enforce discipline and maintain productivity. What he actually did was eliminate the company's ability to complete critical business functions. The irony is that if Dave had been a better manager, he would have recognized my value to the organization and tried to work with me to solve the scheduling problem. He could have offered flexible work arrangements, brought in temporary help to cover my responsibilities, or even just talked to me like a human being about finding a solution that worked for everyone. Instead, he chose to treat the situation as a test of wills where he had to prove his authority. That approach might work when you are managing people who are easily replaceable. It does not work when you are managing people whose skills are critical to business operations. I am not saying I handled everything perfectly either. I could have been more direct about explaining the potential consequences of firing me. I could have tried harder to find a compromise that would have let me attend the funeral without creating a crisis for the company. But honestly, after Dave's initial response to my bereavement request, I did not feel like I owed him any favors. His email made it clear that he had no respect for me as a person or understanding of what I was going through. At that point, I figured he could deal with the consequences of his own policies and decisions. The consulting arrangement ended up working out better for everyone involved. The company got their shipments moving again without having to wait 30 days for board approval. I got paid significantly more than I would have earned in my regular job. And Dave got a valuable lesson about the importance of treating employees like human beings. Well, Dave probably did not actually learn anything from the experience, but everyone else in the company certainly did. My new manager has been much more reasonable about time off requests and family emergencies. She has also made sure that we have backup plans in place for critical business functions so no single employee can hold up important operations. The company has also updated their bereavement leave policy to make it clear that attending funerals for close family members is always an acceptable reason for time off, regardless of business needs. I think the whole experience has made management more aware of how important it is to understand what their employees actually do and why their roles matter to the business. You cannot manage people effectively if you do not understand the work they are performing. It has also reinforced the importance of treating people with basic human decency, especially during difficult personal situations. Companies that support employees through hard times tend to get a lot more loyalty and commitment in return. Of course, not every workplace conflict ends with the employee coming out on top like I did. I was lucky to have specialized skills that gave me leverage in the situation. Most people do not have that kind of protection when they are dealing with unreasonable managers. But I do think there are some general principles that apply to most workplace situations. First, document everything. Keep copies of important emails, policies, and communications. You never know when that documentation might become important. Second, understand your own value to the organization. What skills do you have that would be difficult to replace? What knowledge do you possess that others do not? How would your absence affect critical business operations? Third, do not be afraid to stand up for yourself when the situation calls for it. I am not saying you should be confrontational or difficult to work with, but when someone is treating you unfairly, especially during a personal crisis, you have every right to protect your own interests. And finally, sometimes the best way to handle an unreasonable person is to let them face the natural consequences of their own decisions. You do not always have to argue or fight back directly. Sometimes you can just step back and let their poor judgment catch up with them. In my case, Dave created his own downfall by enforcing policies he did not understand and firing someone whose role he had never bothered to learn about. I did not have to sabotage him or plot against him. I just had to follow the policies he had put in place and let him deal with the results. The whole experience has definitely changed how I think about work and career management. I have a much better understanding of my own market value now, and I am not afraid to negotiate for what I am worth. I have also learned to pay more attention to management styles and company culture when considering job opportunities. Life is too short to work for people who do not respect you as a human being. My grandfather always taught me that how people treat you during difficult times tells you everything you need to know about their character. Dave failed that test completely, but the experience taught me a valuable lesson about standing up for myself and understanding my own worth. I think my grandfather would have been proud of how I handled the whole situation. He believed in doing the right thing even when it was not easy, and he believed that people should face consequences for their actions. Dave chose to prioritize business metrics over basic human decency. He chose to enforce policies without understanding their implications. He chose to fire someone rather than work together to find a reasonable solution. All I did was follow the policies he had put in place and charge market rates for my specialized services. The fact that those policies ended up costing his company $250,000 and his job was entirely his own doing. Sometimes the best revenge really is just following the rules exactly as they are written. Looking back now, 3 months later, I am grateful for how everything worked out. Yes, it was painful to lose my grandfather and then have to deal with Dave's cruelty on top of that grief. But the experience taught me valuable lessons about my own worth and gave me the financial resources to properly honor my grandfather's memory. I still work for the same company, but now I have the respect and compensation I deserve. Dave is gone, and the workplace culture has improved dramatically under new management. Most importantly, I was able to be there for my family when they needed me most, and I have no regrets about the choices I made. My grandfather always said that good things come to those who stand up for what is right. I think this whole experience proved him right once again. The consulting money is mostly spent now, but it served its purpose. I was able to take care of my family, honor my grandfather's memory, and learn some important lessons about my own value in the process. And yes, I still have that thank you card I sent to Dave. Sometimes when I am having a bad day at work, I look at it and remember that standing up for yourself can sometimes lead to the most unexpected victories. My grandfather would have loved that story. He always appreciated a good comeback tale, especially when the little guy came out on top. Rest in peace, Grandpa. Thanks for teaching me to never back down when I know I am right. The next one is a malicious compliance story. This story is about when I worked as a machinist. I had a horrible boss. I just realized that I could end the story there and a bunch of you would relate. Anyways, this boss was the owner's brother-in-law, someone who never had management experience, but rather someone put in a position because relative equals good worker. There are so many examples of what made him horrible, which I won't go into in this post, but this man checked a bunch of boxes. We'll call him Butthole or BH for short. I had worked there for 6 years at the point of this story. It was the week of my review, and I had been unusually nice to him this week. This was also right after one of the sales guys had come over. I was having a chat with BH, and a sales guy came up. I was going through the numbers over the years, and do you realize that over the years of OP being here, the amount of rework coming out of his area has dropped, and profits are up about 400% over the guy he replaced? He started talking some more, and BH cut him off and gave him a look. Sales guy looked at me and back to BH and then walked away. I knew I had some info that I wasn't supposed to know, and he knew I knew. Eventually, I was called in for my review. There were 4 pages of categories scored 1 to 10. It was very routine. All my scores were very good, and in turn, I was feeling good. We finished that up, and I signed it as stating I was in agreeance. He slid it to the side and pulled out a totally different piece of paper. Now that the review for the company is over, this is stuff about you I have noticed. The piece of paper outlined that I spent too much of my time socializing with others, which significantly reduced my productivity. It also stated I spent too much time in the bathroom and needed to adjust my diet so I would refrain from using the bathrooms at work. He had broken this into 3 neat paragraphs, and I do not remember the exact wording. I was floored. I had gone through years of medical crap and even surgeries with my gut. He knew this. Also, if my machine is spinning and making chips, I can talk and pay attention to the normal sounds coming out of my machine without affecting productivity. We got into a heated argument. He was adamant that I was wasting time in the bathroom. I argued that if I go in there and stuff comes out of me, then the bathroom was needed. He said that he had no proof of me actually using the bathroom. I offered to stop flushing and everyone else would alert him of what I did in there for me. Everything he said, I had a retort. At one point, I got so pissed off, I walked out of his office and yelled, "Keep your raise, just don't ducking talk to me anymore." Then he yelled that if I didn't come back, he would fire me for insubordination. I went back in and just stared. He talked for another 20 minutes without me saying a thing. It was a 2% raise, which was decent for current market rates, and I left and went back to work. It's at this point a bunch of people are going to comment about of common sense stuff like how illegal half of this is and what I should be doing about it. I will point out that I am very neurodivergent and very smart, but sometimes lack that sense because of how my brain is wired. I decided to just do what he said. I got subscriptions for Audible and YouTube and wore earbuds literally 100% of the time. I stopped talking to everyone. If someone came up to me and asked WTF, I would state my time at work is for working and not for talking. I got deep into listening to Roll20 and discovered a bunch of authors and books I love to this day. As for the bathroom, I adjusted my diet. I would get home from work and eat one meal immediately that would hold me over until I got what I needed. I called my doctor and told him about my review. My doctor also had some fun words about my boss. I got to drop by and pick up a doctor's note that read, paraphrased, "Due to human nature, this note is to state that OP can use the bathrooms at work when needed." This is also when I found out that HR had no idea about what was going on, as she was like, "What's this for? Of course you're allowed to poop at work." She said she'd look into it. I never heard back. So, no talking to anyone for good productivity, and I had a doctor's excuse for the other thing. He got mad at me daily at this point. Instead of yelling my name to get my attention, he had to walk over and wave to get my attention. Frankly, I heard him half the time but knew it pissed him off to come over, so I ignored him. He would always point out that it would be easier for him if he could get my attention. I would point out that the handbook says these are allowed, and they prevented me from socializing, which he didn't allow. A few weeks of this, and he pulls me into his office, states that people keep asking him why I won't socialize to people, and it's making him uncomfortable. I state it's not making me uncomfortable, that they're his orders, and I have noticed an increase in productivity, so it's working. Did he want me to be less productive? No? Okay, BH, I'll go back to work. You can't order me to socialize with people, especially after ordering me not to socialize with people. I'm not sorry that it makes you uncomfortable that I'm enjoying my book. I continued this for a whole year before I put in my 2 weeks just before my 7-year anniversary and enacted my revenge. I hope you enjoyed this story. There will be more stories of BH and my revenge later. The next one is an entitled people story. Hi, so this happened yesterday when I was out shopping. I went out to a specific mall/gallery that only has anime/video games/K-pop/alt culture related stores. There are plenty of these in my city, and around this one is full of Asian convenience stores, cute cafes, etc. So it's usually a busy area with a lot of weebs, myself included. There are also many TCG shops nearby. I wanted to go to a specific store to buy a Precure Cookie Charm blind bag, but the store was closed, so I went to a Pokemon TCG store to buy a card that my fiancé was looking for. At the store, a man in his 40s approached me and asked if I played the TCG. I told him no, that I was only interested in collecting and that my partner was the player. The man gave me a strange look and said something like, "Typical of a little girl. I'm the adult BTW." He started asking me which Pokemon I like to collect. I answered him coldly because I really wasn't interested in talking to him, but he kept trying to talk to me. He was not being friendly at all, by the way. His tone was very condescending. I don't mind friendly small talk, but this wasn't it. I guess he noticed the pins in my bag because he started asking me about the anime I like. I kept answering coldly, and he started saying that I probably only bought them because they're trendy and that's why my answers didn't reflect the deep knowledge of a true fan. He then started asking me trick questions to try and test my knowledge about certain anime, but at that point I just decided to give him a weird look. He said he was sorry if being proven to be a poser made me feel bad and offered to buy me a coffee to educate me properly. He also called me pretty for being a poser. I reminded her that I have a partner, and by that time the saleswoman had realized the situation and intervened, asking him if he needed help with anything. I didn't find the card I needed, but I did find a man who felt entitled to my time, to question me, to call me a poser, and then, on top of that, invited me for coffee afterwards. Not the weirdest one I've met, but he was the most entitled yet. Or maybe I am overreacting, IDK. Edit to clarify, when he called me a little girl, Ninita, he was being condescending. I do not look like a child, so I don't think he thought I was a teen. I believe look my age, mid-20s. The next one is an entitled parent story. Hey, so I am 19F and I still live with my parents. I'll give some backstory. I had my 2 cats for 8 years. My mother has a pattern of getting animals and getting rid of them since I was born. I'll list some of the animals. 4 dogs, 4 cats, including the ones I'm talking about, 15 birds, 3 rabbits, 4 guinea pigs, 6 rats, 2 mice, fish, 3 lizards, etc. I have never had an animal pass away of old age, and some of these listed I had for years. My mother is allergic to long-haired cats, but my cats were short-haired cats. So it starts off 2 weeks ago. My mother got her allergy blood test back, and we find out she's apparently severely allergic to my cats. The thing is that Tess tested cats in general, not short hair cats, so obviously it was going to come back positive, and she also goes around my uncles and brothers' short hair cats and is fine. My mom then decided that she wanted the cats gone ASAP. I was obviously devastated because these are my babies. A week after finding out, I decided to get fish just as a distraction because my mental health was plummeting. I've always struggled with my mental health. And I needed a little hobby. I didn't ask for my mother's permission, which is my bad, I'll admit that, but it is kept in my room and I take care of it very well. I've also put like $400 plus into the tank. I told my mom and stepdad about it and they completely lost it. My boyfriend of nearly 4 years had helped me with it and was at mine the day they found out. My mom came into my room and started screaming at me, and we both were saying things, but I was basically saying how we've never had an animal till they've died and how she always does this, etc. When my stepdad got home, he started threatening my boyfriend, saying, "Me and you are going to have a talk outside, and I'll fucking throw you out this house." Mind you, my boyfriend didn't even say a word, because he was genuinely scared he was going to get hit. We would have gone to my boyfriend's house, but it was the last weekend with the cats, so we didn't want to leave. We didn't talk to them for 2 days until I decided to be the bigger person and talk to my parents separately and resolve our issues because I didn't want so much happening after the cats were gone. I talked to both of them, and me and my stepdad are fine, and I thought me and my mum were fine since we talked for an hour and a half and acted like normal after. On the day I had to drop my cats off at the shelter, I decided I wanted to stay with my boyfriend for the week. I am writing this while still at his, because I can't be alone right now, and on the second day of me being gone, I went home during the day for an hour to feed the fish. In that talk I had with Mum, I let her know I'll be home while she's at work to feed them. She was all good with it. She started messaging me asking why I was home and how I shouldn't be coming home when I'm gone. She started to try to argue, and I stopped responding, and every day since I've been gone has been texting me, trying to start a fight, which is confusing for me because I thought we cleared everything. Today she texted me and is saying when I get home tomorrow that she wants to have a talk with me. The talks are always about her and my stepdad putting me down about being in my room too much ECT, and tried to start another fight over text. I'm sorry, this is so long. It's just hard because I'm trying to mourn the loss of my babies, and she's making this all about herself. She has done this again and again. She has done more to me about my mental health, but that'll make this way too long. Mind you, one of my brothers cut contact with her, and my other brother is only talking to her because I live there. I don't get how she doesn't care about them being gone, or how she knows I'm feeling horrible and try to make me feel worse. I'll answer any questions left in the comments, as I know this is poorly explained. Anyway, thank you for watching.